Good afternoon, and welcome to our event, Celebrating Caribbean Americans. What role can they play in advancing US-Caribbean ties? I am Melanie Chen, a board member at the Atlantic Council and the founder of the Caribbean Initiative at the Adrian Arst Latin America Center. I am currently the only Atlantic Council board member born in the Caribbean. Today, we are here to celebrate Caribbean American Heritage Month, and I'm pleased to be doing so in collaboration with the Caribbean Policy Consortium. This month, designated as National Caribbean American Heritage Month less than 20 years ago, represents the strong partnership between the United States and the Caribbean. In many ways, this partnership continues to grow and strengthen because of the consistent contributions Caribbean Americans make to US society, culture, politics, and the economy. Equally, Caribbean Americans have strengthened the relationship by helping stimulate economic growth and recovery in the region during times of need. We saw this recently during the COVID-19 pandemic, where remittances from Jamaica's US-based diaspora increased in 2021. The diaspora was able to supplement incomes in Jamaica at a time when job loss, poverty, and broad economic decline skyrocketed. Now, as the broader region continues to recover from the pandemic, while bracing for emerging storm systems during hurricane season and the impact of globally high food and energy prices, Caribbean countries will continue to need the support of its diaspora. One area where the diaspora can play a crucial role is in the implementation of some of the commitments that arose from the Summit of the Americas a few weeks ago. At the summit, the US government announced several initiatives that will help support food security, economic development, energy security, and climate resilience in the Caribbean. The Economic Partnership for the Americas and the US-Caribbean Partnership to Address the Climate Crisis 2030 are just a few examples. For these initiatives to be successful, it will take consistent follow-up and policy action that meets the needs of each Caribbean country. Given the region's diversity, there's no better resource to work with than the Caribbean diaspora to help achieve some of these desired outcomes and ensure these summit commitments turn into policy reality. The diaspora is the natural link between the United States and Caribbean and can be seen as a resource that provides insight into national and regional dynamics without leaving US shores. They have a vested interest in the economic, security, and political circumstances of the region, since the Caribbean citizens that often benefit from US policy are their parents, siblings, friends, and other family members. I look forward to our further celebrating the role of the Caribbean American community and their role in policymaking over the course of the next hour. On that note, I'll now turn it over to Jason Marzak, Senior Director of the Adrian Arst Latin America Center, to introduce and moderate our first panel. Jason, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Melanie, and good afternoon to everyone joining us for this incredibly important conversation and celebration of Caribbean American Heritage Month. I'm also very pleased that the founder of the Adrian Arst Latin America Center, Adrian Arst, is also online joining us today as well. I also want to thank the Caribbean Policy Consortium for partnering with us on this event. David Lewis, the consortium's co-founder, will moderate a discussion in the second half of the hour with two members of the Caribbean diaspora. Since the Adrian Arst Latin America Center launched our Caribbean initiative last February, we've looked to raise awareness of the unique challenges facing CARICOM countries and also the incredible importance of having a strong US-Caribbean partnership. And key to this partnership is, of course, the Caribbean diaspora. Caribbean Americans are the enduring link between the United States and its CARICOM neighbors. And for the wider Caribbean, the diaspora is millions of people strong, and many are dispersed across the United States from New York to California. Now, many of you tuning in today may actually be part of the diaspora, or likely have friends or colleagues or others in your life who are members of this important diaspora. In every state or city, Caribbean Americans are having an important impact. Right here in Washington, D.C., of course, Vice President Harris, of course, Jamaican American. And not too long ago in New York, we saw the unveiling of a little Guyana as well. And in South Florida today, increasingly on Sunday morning, you may see a cricket match being played just alongside a soccer match. This is what newcomers to the United States do. They enrich our culture and the lives of those around them. Today, we'll draw on the impact of Caribbean Americans to look ahead and see what role they can play in even furthering U.S.-Caribbean ties. Specifically, the role in shaping outcomes from the Summit of the Americas, which may seem like ages ago, but was actually only earlier this month. As Melanie mentioned, the U.S. proposals at the summit sought to advance economic development, food and energy security, and climate resilience in the Caribbean. And at a time when Caribbean countries are facing challenges on several fronts, including with the start of hurricane season, rising food and energy prices, and limited access to global finance, the post-summit action, the follow-up, the implementation of agreements is absolutely vital. And the months ahead, how they are implemented will underscore the future health of Caribbean economies and the relationship with the United States. And we from the Agent Orange Latin America Center will be continuing to raise awareness on the importance of these summit commitments. So to discuss these commitments in greater detail, we have a number of great speakers today, and I'm pleased to first welcome Barbara Feinstein, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Caribbean Affairs and Haiti at the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. Barbara, thank you so much for taking the time for being here today. Barbara previously served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Caribbean Affairs, Haiti, Cuba, Mexico, and Central America at USAID. In this position, among many other things, and I've had the pleasure of seeing Barbara's work firsthand over the years and her incredible commitment to all things she works on. She worked to deploy surge staff across the Caribbean during hurricane season and also positioned additional disaster response experts in the midst of the COVID pandemic. So, Barbara, let's jump into our conversation. I think the first question I have for your reflection, and from your vantage point now at State Department, where you've been now for the last few months, why does the Caribbean diaspora matter for policymaking at state? And how do you see the diaspora as being even more a part of your work moving forward?
Thanks so much for the question, Jason, and really huge thanks to the Atlantic Council for convening this event, to all who are tuned in for this important celebration of Caribbean American Heritage Month, and importantly to talk about the status of U.S.-Caribbean relations and the deliverables or outcomes from the Summit of the Americas, which I think were pretty profound for the Caribbean and have the potential to really transform our relationship with the region. In terms of the diaspora, I personally go back to my own kind of professional background prior to joining USAID and now the State Department. I worked on Capitol Hill for several years. I also worked in USAID's Legislative Affairs Department. And as a result of that, kind of everything that we do on behalf of the US government, I see as being accountable to the taxpayers, accountable to Congress, and accountable to constituents, to the American people. And in this sense, Caribbean American diaspora are a critical part of everything that we do, policy, assistance, you name it. It's an important community that we are accountable to, and a community that has diverse perspectives that are absolutely critical in terms of shaping policymaking, in terms of shaping assistance. These are communities that obviously have lived experiences and expertise to share networks, specifically with regard to the Caribbean, that link back to the Caribbean, and understanding of the climate and understanding as appropriate of language. And I think that we ignore these perspectives very much at our own peril. And when we actually work hand in glove with the diaspora, we end up with better policy, we end up with better programs, and we're more accountable to the taxpayer. Thanks,
Barbara. How do you see moving forward the diaspora as being even more part of your work on a day-to-day basis at state, and insofar as also the policies that you're seeking to move forward and how those policies are informed?
So I think, as you said, it's really critical that as we are formulating policy and implementing policy, that we incorporate the diaspora perspective, that we reach out, that we have stakeholder consultation. So, for example, as we are looking at the kind of next stage of U.S. Caribbean strategy, it will be very important that we have a wide-ranging set of consultations with diaspora from various communities representing the countries of the Caribbean. Obviously, Haitian diaspora is something that's very much better represented, I think, traditionally in terms of U.S. policymaking conversations, because the Haitian diaspora has been so vocal because of their numbers. But I think beyond Haitian diaspora, looking across various different Caribbean communities, it's really important that we take those perspectives into account. I think that the private sector in the United States, as represented by various diaspora communities, is also critical in terms of helping to implement some of these commitments, some of the areas that were just mentioned coming out of the Summit of the Americas, whether it's on energy, resilience, economic growth, food security. There's a lot of expertise resident in our diaspora communities here in the United States to shape the policies, to shape the programs, and perhaps even to help implement or buttress the implementation of these initiatives.
All right, I couldn't agree more, and bringing up the role of the private sector and the diaspora as leaders in the private sector is absolutely vital for moving forward summit commitments. Let's drill down a little bit further. What are some of the examples which you've seen of how the diaspora, as you look to further engage the diaspora in policymaking, of how the diaspora can help to shape policy in a positive way that couldn't be done without potentially the participation of the diaspora?
So I know, for example, the Atlantic Council and you in particular, Jason, have taken a leadership role on issues around de-risking, correspondent banking, that set of issues. And I think that the engagement that the diaspora community has had with Congress has led to, CODELs or congressional delegations to the Caribbean, pretty unprecedented in this space and on this topic. And that then leading to hearings, leading to further action in the legislative branch and the executive branch as well. So I think that when constituent communities come together with their members of Congress to raise those issues, bring them into the policy for trigger legislation, as well as engage directly with the executive branch, we end up with better policy and better outcomes.
Yeah, so thank you, Barbara. And I think that the diaspora is vital for moving forward a whole host of different issues. I want to also invite those who are watching, if you want to raise a question, please feel free, if you're watching via Zoom, to use the Q&A function. I'll try and bring your question into the conversation. Barbara, let's move on to the summit. So the summit recently concluded. Again, it might seem like it was months ago, but it was really only a few weeks ago, in which many of us were in Los Angeles and heard really great feedback from a number of participants from the Caribbean about the importance of the summit and how the summit sought to move different policy issues forward. What has been, so in these few weeks since the summit, if you could share what you've been focusing on, especially with regard to next steps on the U.S. Caribbean partnership to address the climate crisis 2030, or otherwise known as PAC 2030. A number of different announcements from the U.S. government on broader regional efforts, many of which affect the Caribbean, but this is the one announcement that was specifically geared specific to the Caribbean.
Thanks, Jason. So let me just say, within the State Department, I cover the Caribbean and Haiti. Haiti we only consider differently because it's an Office of Haitian Affairs, Office of Caribbean Affairs. So obviously I have a bias in favor of Caribbean policy, but my understanding is, from the White House's perspective, truly one of the highlights of the Summit of the Americas was the lengthy engagement between Vice President Harris and the President of the United States, President Biden, with Caribbean leaders. This was a lengthy meeting, I think more than 90 minutes, really hammering out what the key issues are for Caribbean leaders, a sort of no-nonsense discussion in terms of Caribbean leaders having an opportunity to really share their concerns on issues related to food security, related to financing, related to climate change and energy. And the President of the United States and the Vice President, among other leaders from our government, really listening, taking copious notes, and promising robust and prompt follow-up. And so coming out of that discussion was an agreement that there would be a creation of 3 high-level action committees dedicated to food security, energy, and financing, development financing, specifically to address the issues. So in the area of climate change, for example, I think there is widespread agreement, especially on the part of Caribbean countries, that yes, more needs to be done to move countries to a better renewable energy path. However, there's a recognition that doing so is expensive. It takes resources, it takes budgets, and many countries in the Caribbean lack the fiscal space in order to make these kinds of investments. And at the same time, based on how they are categorized by international financial lending standards, they are not eligible for the kind of low-cost financing that they need in order to make these kinds of investments. So that's an issue that the United States is very much taking on board, among several others. On food security, there was an announcement of $28 million to address food security challenges in the Caribbean. And similarly on energy, looking at a whole wide variety of issues, many of which are covered under PAC 2030, but related to climate change. How do you make this transition to renewable energy? How do you address some of these financing questions? How do you build greater resilience to natural disasters? You mentioned, Jason, that we are just at the start of the hurricane season. Part of my job every day is sort of waking up and tuning into whatever the latest weather forecast is to understand, as you know, right now we're dealing with a tropical depression impacting Trinidad and Tobago, hitting the Dutch Caribbean kind of as we speak. So how can we strengthen the resilience of these countries to deal with the impacts of climate change, of weather events, so that they are on stronger footing? So in terms of what we are doing, may sound very bureaucratic, but the nuts and bolts of it are that we have now appointed senior level chairs for each of these working groups. We've been in touch with our partners from CARICOM, from the Caribbean community and the Dominican Republic. We've asked them to send us proposals of what would be their desired outcomes in each of these areas. And then we're having meetings on our side to take a look at those proposals, to look at how we can address the specific concerns that have been raised within the resources that we have, with the tools that we have. And where we don't have the tools, what can we do to get closer to try to find the tools or improve those to address those concerns.
Well, Barbara, that's important progress in just a few weeks' time, designating high-level chairs already for these groups. And yes, maybe for some it might seem bureaucratic, but you need the bureaucratic push to actually be able to implement these ideas and from announcements to fruition. And there's a follow-up question for you, and we'll then soon turn it over to a video to play and Ambassador Marks. But there's a question in the Q&A, and it also goes to a similar question I have: is what's your advice on how members of the diaspora can get even more involved in whether it's implementation of summit commitments or other issues? Adrian Murtha raises this in the Q&A about how to get involved in how to make sure the issues that are priorities for the Caribbean can better get onto the crowded regional and international agenda and radar.
So I would say I am very excited to see that the Caribbean is getting the attention that it deserves in terms of the international and certainly the U.S. foreign policy agenda. The fact that the Vice President is personally overseeing this process and is kind of pinging each of us, not the Vice President personally, but her staff, and holding us accountable to pursue prompt follow-up is definitely a strong motivation for all of us to deliver on these issues. I think certainly staying in touch with members of Congress and making sure that they are conveying those concerns. And of course, we welcome the direct engagement at the State Department. My electronic door, virtual door at this time of the pandemic is always open. I was mentioning that I appreciate waking up on a regular basis to David Lewis's emails. I don't know how he sends them in the middle of the night, but always reading those to stay on top of what's going on in the Caribbean. So we welcome and we frankly need that kind of engagement. So please continue it.
Thank you, Barbara. And as you know, that's the reason we started the Caribbean Initiative at the Atlantic Council as well, is to give that priority to Caribbean issues in and of itself, but also the broader contextual importance of the Caribbean for the region writ large and for the global community. Barbara, I want to thank you for not only taking the time, but also for all of your excellent work. And just since the start of the year, since you moved over to the State Department and really moving forward all issues critical to the Caribbean. So thank you for that, and look forward to continuing to work with you. I want to play a short video that highlights some of the contributions of Caribbean Americans, and then I'm pleased to then welcome Ambassador Audrey Marks for a short conversation. Thanks again, Barbara.
Thank you.
Well, that's just a short clip of the importance of Caribbean Americans to the United States, our daily lives, and the increasing importance as we continue to move forward. I'm now pleased to welcome Ambassador Audrey Marks, who is Jamaica's ambassador to the United States, and also serves as its permanent representative to the Organization of American States. Ambassador Marks, great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful.
And, I'm happy that I got on in time to hear Das Feinstein give such a great report on what has been happening in terms of our relationship and the work that is being done since the summit. So thank you, Das Feinstein, as usual.
And Das Feinstein's still on, and I see a smile on her face. So thank you so much for that great report. And Ambassador Marks, for your comments. For those, many of you know Ambassador Marks was educated in both Jamaica and Florida, started 6 businesses, including Paymaster, which is the first multi-transaction agency in the Caribbean. You've now served 2 terms as ambassador, making history as both Jamaica's first female ambassador to the United States and also the first individual to hold the position twice. Ambassador, it was absolutely wonderful to see you and host Prime Minister Holness at our summit readout ballroom dinner in Los Angeles. Today we're over video, but thank you so much for that great participation, and congratulations to you and to your Prime Minister for his excellent comments and thoughts as we were closing out the summit just a few weeks ago. Real honor for me and for the Atlantic Council to be able to host him and to be able to host you again today, especially hosting you, given the fact that Jamaicans comprise the largest Caribbean diaspora group here in the United States, at over 1 million strong, although you have the latest number. So it's really important to have you here as part of this conversation. Ambassador, let me start. The US-based Caribbean diaspora, it spans the entire country, mostly concentrated in Florida and New York, with also growing populations in Texas and in California as well. From your perspective, celebrating today Caribbean American Heritage Month, how are Caribbean Americans, in particular members of the Jamaican diaspora, shaping U.S.-Caribbean relations?
Well, before I answer your questions, Jason, let me just take a moment to acknowledge some persons who I see on the screen that are constantly working for the U.S.-Caribbean relationship. I see Dr. Nelson. I'm not seeing Melanie, but I know that I need to thank her for the work that she's doing with your organization, the Atlantic Council, and the focus on the Caribbean interest in the American Council. So I want to just make sure I especially acknowledge her.
She's here. She's here. She gave opening remarks.
I see. Okay. And of course, the hardworking Dr. David Lewis. I also see Dr. Lewis on. So who has always been advocating for Caribbean interests here in the United States. So I thank you, and I thank everyone who's on that for this important topic. So the question is about Jamaicans here in the diaspora. And you're right, we have a very large diaspora. In fact, I think anywhere you go in the world, you'll find a Jamaican, and especially here in the United States, just about every state, there are Jamaicans here residing in every state in the United States. We have, of course, mostly, as you mentioned, in the Northeast and in the southern part of the United States. And I actually did a map once, and of the top 20, and I went from 1.3 million in the Northeast area all the way to about 3,000 in Delaware. So we're trying very hard to make sure we start mapping our diaspora, because they are very much here, very progressive, very involved in multiple areas in the US economy, from the medical field, education field, boardrooms, and as entrepreneurs. And especially in politics, Jamaicans have really displayed exceptional leadership abilities. There are over 40 Jamaicans now in the legislature in the Northeast tri-state area, and over 20 in Florida. That is going from the county level right up to the state level. And of course, we have Jamaicans in leadership at the federal level, where we now have 6 Jamaican Americans in Congress. And of course, we have 2 Jamaican Americans in the cabinet at the White House, and many others in the Biden Harris administration. So I'm very pleased and proud at how so many Jamaicans are getting involved in the United States, in participating in the policy making that is taking place. That will all go well for their and their children's future, and especially will, because of their background, will also make them much more aware of the need to continue strengthening the ties between US and Jamaica and the Caribbean.
Thank you, Ambassador. Those are really, impressive. Impressive that I didn't realize that these 40 members in the tri-state area who are elected officials, and I'm assuming that these numbers will just continue to grow over time. The Caribbean diaspora have had opportunities, as you were just mentioning, to influence U.S. policy direction, have also been incredibly important for the Caribbean overall during challenging times, including sending remittances, increasing remittances in the middle of the COVID pandemic. From your perspective, what are some specific examples of how the Caribbean diaspora, also the Jamaican diaspora in particular, can shape U.S. political, economic, security policy to the Caribbean in a positive way? And this goes a little bit back to my conversation with Das Feinstein, but what do you see from your perspective and so far as some of the more important contributions that the diaspora is making?
Yes, I noted some of Das Feinstein's response, and I won't repeat those, but I will certainly say, and I will start with the recent response to the pandemic. We were in the early days when we weren't sure what was happening with vaccines, so it was pretty scarce. And I was so very pleased at the immediate response when we asked the diaspora to contact their representatives to ensure that Jamaica, that the Caribbean will have access to vaccines. There was no hesitation. There was full involvement and advocacy and just total involvement in trying to make sure that the Caribbean region remains on the minds of the administrators to ensure that we got access. And it was a very successful outreach. But to go back, Jamaica, the Caribbean diaspora has a long-standing tradition of advocacy here in the United States, going back to Marcus Garvey, our first national hero, who started the Pan-African movement here at the turn of the century. The Caribbean is really regarded as the US third border, and as such, it is a win-win for the advocacy to be maintained, because when the Caribbean is doing well, it augurs well for the United States in terms of the protection of its own third border. We have so many issues of common concern. So it is important that this dialogue continues and that is encouraged. And in this connection, I must take a minute to really recognize and laud the work of the Caribbean, the Institute of Caribbean Studies, led by our own Dr. Claire Nelson, founder and president, who is on and who I'm looking forward to hearing later on. They have been doing phenomenal work, lobbying members of Congress and making sure that they are sensitive to the issues affecting the Caribbean communities and advocating for the economic and security interests of the region. And I know they also do a lot of work, that's fancy, with the State Department. Whenever you need to get a temperature of what is happening in the diaspora, Dr. Nelson and our team, they're always ready to participate. So again, we have many organizations, but as I see Dr. Nelson, I want to make sure that I recognize the work that is being done there. I would say, to get back to your question as to what we would like to see happen more with members of the diaspora to be involved, one of the first things I'd want to push is for persons to know that, well, certainly for Jamaica, you can have both a US and a Jamaican passport. So I want to urge, and I use every opportunity to urge Jamaicans here in the diaspora to get out, get registered, to become citizens, because you have many Jamaicans who have been here over 20 years, 30 years, and they just have that one Jamaican passport. And I've been trying to encourage persons to get a second passport, get your US passport, and fully participate as a citizen. And having done so, I want to encourage persons to get out and vote, be part of the system. and in so doing, help to influence policy direction. The second thing that I would say is that while we have many Jamaican, many Caribbean diaspora organizations who are doing great things in the communities, I believe that more can be accomplished if they work in a more cohesive manner. So that is another area that I'm trying to encourage more participation, more interaction. That's another reason I want to acknowledge the work that you're doing, Jason, with the Atlantic Council and your focus on the Caribbean, because I note your effort to integrate the many organizations that are focused on similar issues. And I think that is very commendable, and you will have all our support in this direction.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Ambassador. And it's always so wonderful to hear those comments and to hear as you say, the importance of the diaspora being a part of even further being a part of the U.S. fabric and the U.S. community and exercising their right to vote, which is critical for influencing policy. I want to shift and ask you about the Summit of the Americas. I mentioned we were together in Los Angeles just a few weeks ago. Das Feinstein was speaking previously about some of the steps that have been taken since the summit, specifically around the U.S. Caribbean partnership to address climate crisis, but also other issues that were advanced as part of the summit. From your perspective, where are the greatest opportunities now, reflecting a few weeks later, to advance U.S. Caribbean cooperation that came out of the summit? And specifically within those opportunities, how can the diaspora be better involved?
So let me first say that we are so pleased with the commitment of the U.S. administration to multilateral diplomacy in terms of addressing the many crises that we have going on in the region. And both President Biden and Vice President Harris, they did not back down from facing some tough audiences in terms of the tough audience in terms of the leadership of the region, saying that you have ignored us for a long time. We are not important. We don't seem to be important to you. We are, and then asking really hard questions. They were fully engaged, and I think most of the leaders were quite impressed with the generosity of their time and the earnestness in how they approached the dialogue. So it was a very good engagement, and I just want to place on record what I've heard from all the leaders, especially from CARICOM, their appreciation. And certainly, as Das Feinstein mentioned earlier, the focus on the critical areas, energy security, food security, climate change. And in that respect, to look back at PAC 2030, as you've asked, the commitment to not only speak about it, but to ensure that we have execution was very important. And so the formation of the working group with members of the administration and members of the CARICOM community. And if you would have noticed, and I think that's mentioned this, that the CARICOM community the CARICOM leaders decided not only to put senior representatives on a working group, but they themselves, three leaders, three prime ministers are themselves involved in being part of the working group to show the importance. Because for us, these challenges, they are a threat to our very existence, especially in terms of the climate change that is happening, as was mentioned earlier. And so without a better system of accessing financing to build resilience, we are going to continue on a very perilous path. So I'm pleased to see that progress is being made after the summit to move from talk towards implementation. And I think where organizations can be of support is to become au fait with the commitments that have been made and the progress that has been, the dialogue that is continuing, and so that they can play a part in pushing, because things have a way of starting off with a lot of momentum and then gradually fading. So the diaspora organizations like the ICS will be very important. It can play an important role in keeping the momentum going. And so we at the embassy, and I know for the Caribbean Caucus of Ambassadors, we'll be very pleased to ensure that we have regular meetings with the diaspora organizations. And of course, as usual, we talk with our team and friends at the State Department to ensure that we keep the dialogue going and keep the diaspora organizations updated as to where we're at and what role they can play. So basically, that is how I see it. It's partly we are going to have to push very hard to make sure we keep the leaders of the diaspora organizations updated so that they can continue playing an advocate role in making sure things continue to happen.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Marks. I think that means many more conversations like this to keep people updated on those commitments. And as you know, and Das Feinstein and others, that the commitment of the Atlantic Council, not only in the lead up to the summit and the importance of inclusivity and the importance of Caribbean priorities being a part of the summit agenda, but also the follow-up and the implementation as part of that summit, including issues like financing for resilience, which is so important for countries all across the CARICOM. So, Ambassador, I want to thank you again for your taking the time for your expert insights into the role of the Caribbean diaspora, for your important messages to the nearly 200 people watching via Zoom, and I'm sure the many others watching via other platforms. And again, thank Das Feinstein for joining the earlier conversation. Now, before we turn to our final discussion, I want to first turn over to Wasim Mullah, Assistant Director of our Caribbean Initiative, who is also a member of the Caribbean Diaspora. Wasim?
Thank you, Jason. As Jason mentioned, I'm a member of the Caribbean Diaspora, a proud one, in fact. I am a Guyanese American, a Caribbean American, and someone who's been shaped by the people, challenges, and benefits of both the United States and the region. At an early age, I have seen and understood the power of the Caribbean diaspora, whether it's living in Queens or in South Florida. The West Indian community and its ability to shape policy and support development in the region has always been apparent to me. Sending money back to Guyana and the wider Caribbean in the aftermath of flash flooding or hurricanes, buying West Indian products at local grocery stores, or calling congressional representatives in moments of regional crises are just a few moments that stick out. The impression this has left on me is something I carry into my current role with the Adrian Arch Latin America Center and the Caribbean Initiative. Much of our work is rooted in the issues affecting the region, including access to financial tools, energy security, and a more consistent US policy to the Caribbean. These are all challenges I, family members, and friends have or continue to face in the region. This is why, as we think about solutions to these challenges, it is important that the center, US and Caribbean governments, and other stakeholders in the region work hand in hand with the diaspora, benefiting from our own experiences and perspectives. We hold an innate understanding of US and Caribbean environments, spending most of our lives living, working, and enjoying each respective country or region. Therefore, going forward, it is only fitting that Caribbean Americans are part of the solution and are seen as a resource to all that want to strengthen US-Caribbean relationship. That brings us to our discussion today, our next panel. We have heard of the role that the diaspora will play in implementing some of the outcomes from the summit. And next, we'll hear about the broader role of the diaspora in strengthening US-Caribbean ties. For that discussion, I'd like to introduce the conversation's moderator and partner for our event, Dr. David Lewis. David is Vice President at Manchester Trade and co-founder of the Caribbean Policy Consortium, our partner for today. He is an international trade and investment expert with over 25 years working in Latin America and the Caribbean. David has also worked with several organizations across the hemisphere and works frequently with both public and private sectors. With that, I'll turn it over to David to begin our next discussion.
Thank you, Wasim. Thank you, Jason, Melanie, everybody in the Atlantic Council Caribbean Initiative for inviting the Caribbean Policy Consortium and myself to join you in this, what we hope will be the first of various collaboration efforts on Caribbean issues here in the US and in the region. Das Feinstein, thank you so much for joining and the support your office has given to these efforts. And of course, Ambassador Marks, with the leadership that you and the embassy have given, not only on this diaspora question and your engagement also with government officials from Jamaica, but overall on the agenda of the Caribbean here in Washington and across the United States. So we're very privileged today to have two diaspora representatives working with us today who have had extensive experience working in the US in a variety of areas. First, Dr. Claire Nelson, who's the founder and president of the Institute of Caribbean Studies, the enabler and starter of Caribbean American Heritage Month early in this century, and a lead thinker both in science and technology as a trained engineer and with a long career as an official at the Inter-American Development Bank, where in addition to economic development work and science and technology, she single-handedly led all the efforts at the IDB to raise the level of African American, African Caribbean presence at the bank and in its projects. So Claire, thank you for joining us today. And then also from the Guyanese American diaspora, Dr. Terrence Blackman, who's a professor of mathematics at Medgar Evers College of the City University of New York, one of our collaborators with the CPC on many Guyanese initiatives, and somebody who's been working closely with his platform, the Guyana Business Journal, to engage the Guyana diaspora in many of these initiatives we've discussed. Time is short today, so what I'll do is streamline for both of you and starting with Claire, how both of you are seeing the role of the diaspora in terms of engaging the US government, the private sector, and civil society in terms of advancing these initiatives, but then also how you see it with regards to the region. Next week, we have the CARICOM Heads of Government Summit in Suriname, and we hope that many of these issues that the US government and the Summit of the Americas have put on the agenda will be discussed, but also that we need to engage more with the home governments on this diaspora level. Claire, why don't you lead us off, and then we'll have Terrence continue.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. In the interest of time, I'll jump right in and begin by saying that Caribbean American Heritage Month was about, first of all, giving visibility, voice, and agency to this block. As a block, we didn't really exist. We're just like disparate people floating around the sea, flotsam and jetsam. And so by creating the month, we created an opportunity for those individuals who saw themselves as part of the American construct, those diaspora people who see themselves as part of the policymaking voice to now organize. So we're now, as I say, stage 3, we're building out our agency. And in that regard, I think some of the organized, or what I call some of the assembled diaspora, as opposed to the unassembled diaspora, the assembled diaspora are quite small, and by and large, the assembled diaspora is volunteer. So the assembled diaspora, nonetheless, has been organizing to begin this policy conversations and transforming themselves from charity donors to development investors. In that regard, I think HR 4939 was an instrumental gain, given that we had our first event in 1999. I must say, in 1998, we were the first to bring the CARICOM Secretary General to an event on the Hill. And so it took us all of these years to begin to have a place in the table where we were very instrumental in organizing the consultative process for the 2020 version of the US Strategic Engagement Agenda, and are now engaged in rewriting that green paper and developing our working group approach and inviting more diaspora people who see themselves as involved in the policymaking agenda. This animal we call the Caribbean American Leadership Alliance that was born in 2007, building it out to give people a place to find themselves. The Caribbean diaspora is really like a group of cats. They cannot be herded. You kind of have to have people find their own way. And so we have been trying to kind of hold a base and make the month a crucible for this. And we've had some successes where we find now at the state level, some people are using the month to organize state level partnerships. And we hope to continue to build that out. And the last thing, in the interest of time, just want to say that a part of the challenge we have on the CARICOM side is that CARICOM itself doesn't have a strong civil society engagement process. And so to the extent that we have tried to penetrate the CARICOM Heads of Government agenda and different functional corporation committees, it's always more like a personality, knowing a personality, as opposed to a systemic engagement process. And that's one of the things I hope will change as we go forward.
Thank you, Claire. And those are very good points, particularly that engagement and advocacy point, and making sure that we have a balance of what the diaspora is doing institutionally, but who and how to engage with back with home governments. Terrence, you're Guyanese American. Guyana is now the sexy flavor of the decade, I would say, because of the energy boom. And that has stimulated also what I've seen, a lot of engagement from the diaspora. Share with us your views on this engagement situation from that perspective and how you see it going forward.
So I thank you. So first off, thank you, David, and thank you to folks at the Atlantic Council. And it is a genuine pleasure to be here to say a few words in this regard. I think what I would begin by saying is that there has been broad, as Dr. Nelson just noted. There are many diaspora efforts that exist across. I think the scholar Lair Matthews has identified, in terms of the Guyanese diaspora, almost close to 400 hometown associations that are involved in lots of activities related to Guyana. I think the challenge has been, as Dr. Nelson has just described, is that there has not been a systemic engagement on the part of Caribbean governments with their diaspora. I think the Jamaican ambassador can take pride in knowing that, in a sense, Jamaica is a model. Jamaica, in a sense, has done the best for many of the Caribbean countries in terms of the way in which it has engaged its diaspora. And I think now, speaking as a Guyanese, I think that we are now in the process of really trying to work out what that relationship coming from the home country with the diaspora community here should be at the formal level. And I think we still have not yet codified what that relationship looks like. There's much work to be done, and I think our diaspora organizations have been independently, so to speak, focused on trying to promote health, to promote education, to work with the indigenous peoples, to look at critical environmental issues, to, as was described, sort of focus on the agricultural and industrial sector, to look for ways to empower young people, to help with the questions of the multi-ethnic, multiracial social cohesion that is a challenge for Guyana, to promote entrepreneurship and investment, to help the government to be more efficient and transparent in its relations. So there are lots of areas where various diaspora organizations have been working in a kind of, not efficient, but maybe ad hoc manner. But the intent is there, and I think what we really need to see now emerging is a more systemic infrastructure for doing this kind of thing. And I think this is one of the ways in which the diaspora here in the American relation to the United States policy can perhaps be a real bridge between the policymaking at home and the policymaking here.
Thank you, Terence. And actually, numbers do matter. It's no coincidence that Jamaica has taken such a lead. Out of the last census, where we have 3.5 million Caribbean Americans of the non-Hispanic Caribbean in the US, 1.2 million were calculated as Jamaican Americans, another million Haiti, Guyana at almost 250,000, and then we have about 640,000 totaled of all the other countries in the region. When you compare that with 2.4 million Dominican Americans, 2.3 million Cuban Americans, and then of course 4 million Puerto Ricans who are US citizens, that's a lot of numbers of Caribbean people in the US who stimulate business, consume goods and services, and do political and economic engagement. Claire, how do you see the diaspora coming together on those fronts to support the economic issues which the region now has to face in terms of energy, food security, and revitalizing the tourism industry, which, whether we agree with it or not, is the immediate source of immediate monies in people's pockets in the Caribbean?
Thank you for that question. Since 2020 and COVID, when we all realized that we had to shape the world to a new world order, so to speak, we've been organizing under something we call the Smart Caribbean Agenda. For the last 8 years, we've been focusing on agriculture in a broad sense. We call it the Family Future Initiative, where we look at agriculture as a driver of change for food security, pharmaceuticals, fuel, forestry, and of course, fisheries and the whole blue economy sector. So agriculture and the blue economy, I think, and the rethinking of the blue economy and the Caribbean Sea in particular as a space of uniting us. That way, all the different groups can find their place. Because blue economy includes energy, it includes, and agriculture includes energy, it includes health, it includes tourism. And so since most groups are volunteers, they can find their space within this construct and then use what already exists, which is the global SDGs, as a sort of a metric. So one of the things I would like to see, for example, is that the CARICOM region be much more visible and vocal about how do all of these plans and this funding that they're going to secure tie into their own Vision 2030 strategies, and create a very transparent dashboard for that information. We're very concerned on this side on the issue of transparency. It's going to be a new gospel, right? We want to see that there is a platform where there's participatory engagement of civil society. We're civil society, so we as Diaspora must also be engaged with civil society on the ground and strengthen them. So these are just some ways I think we can move forward. And finally, the private sector and the Caribbean region doesn't really understand democracy in the way that we do here. In the American construct, we have learned that those who speak loudly basically get attention. We have also learned to say to the elected officials that we are the ones who put you there. However, in the Caribbean, it's the reverse. So the Caribbean people still operate on the premise that they are the beneficiaries of the largest of the government and elected officials, versus the elected officials must respond to them. And so this is some of the kind of education we want to make happen on the ground, so that our citizens don't continue to fall into the trap that the government not do nothing for we, but we're kind of bound by these party factions that have existed for the last 60 years across the region, and we don't demand of our elected officials and government and governance the kind of responsibility and transparency we, the Caribbean people who are elected, deserve. And so that kind of partnership, I think that includes the blue economy, which will bring in obviously Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, Cuba, because we all share the sea, right? And America is not a part of the Caribbean Sea construct politically. I think the diaspora and the academia and private sector can begin to shape some of these conversations, so we move towards a hemispheric agenda of a flourishing future that is sustainable, right? Sustainable to begin with, must also be what I call melioristic, believing that we can change the future, agile and aspirational, resilient, and also applies a transformational use of technology to bring about these changes.
That's a big task in terms of not only the advocacy, but then the engagement that's needed and the institutional support to build that. Terrence, many countries in the region, including places like Dominican Republic, El Salvador, of course, Mexico, have now established ministries to deal with the diaspora and to work with sort of like the additional constituency abroad. I know Guyana has started discussing that, a diaspora affairs unit. There've been various events. Can you share some light on how they see that going and where the diaspora in the US fits in terms of many of these engagement and advocacy issues at the economic development level that Claire mentioned?
Well, certainly. I think that there has been over the last two administrations a genuine effort to build an infrastructure in the Guyanese context that effectively integrates its diaspora. And so this is ongoing work, and we have heard from members of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in relation to the plans that are being developed. And so one is cautiously optimistic that those plans will emerge. I think I want to speak from a purely Guyanese perspective around the context of energy security, food security, climate resilience, and to tie this to the connection with American policy, and why it's important for us to have this bridging diaspora as a way to resolve some of the tricky questions. If we're going to achieve the sort of climate goals, right, the world has to cut the consumption of fossil fuels dramatically. But it's evident that these climate change success will put developing countries like Guyana, newly to the fossil fuel game, in a very challenging situation. And so if we're going to have these sorts of conversations that work well for both the US policy engagement, the US policy, and ensures that, as Claire just described, that we have an increasing quality of life across the Caribbean, then there needs to be some bridge for that conversation to occur in a manner that is mutually beneficial. And I think that that's the role that the Caribbean diaspora can play broadly. And I think that that's the role that the diasporas for various Caribbean countries can play in some particular sense. And I'll pause there and I'll respond.
Okay, well, that's good because we have 4 minutes left, so 2 minutes each for our close up. And particularly, I'd like you both to focus on where do we go from here. And I'm keenly interested in that engagement, particularly back home. We have a CARICOM summit next week. I used to participate in many of them. I've got my little pin as a reward when it used to be physical, not virtual. And it is a task in terms of engaging the governments and fixing strategies, but also organizational structures, just like the Summit of the Americas did 2-3 weeks ago, committees, chairs, and who will lead issues. So where do we go into the future in terms of the next engagement with the diaspora and the home countries? Claire, and then Terence, you can close us off.
Well, as a futurist, I like to imagine a very different architecture going forward. I like to imagine that because of HR 4939, because of the work we have been doing, our working group that we have started begins to really take on more, let's say, root and get support from what I call the philanthropic voice in America. For some reason, the philanthropic organizations do not include the Caribbean people, be they the Ocean Foundations, the Nature Conservancies, the Ford Foundation, just like they forgot that we're in there. So one key ask I would ask is that State Department and AID convene, if you will, a non-government donor roundtable that will include the diaspora as part of the conversation so that they understand that we exist as a separate market from Black America. I've been told point blank by Ford, you're all the same, so we don't differentiate. So whereas New Americans include Hispanics, New Americans don't include us. Okay, we may not be so new, but still, we need to be different. Secondly, I would like to see that maybe the next heads of government, that the Jamaican Ministry of Diaspora Affairs may convene to CARICOM the important need to reinstitute a more robust CARICOM civil society engagement process. The Americas Summit allowed our representatives who attended to meet Caribbean civil society there. And out of that has come a renewed interest in working across the boundaries, Caribbean civil society and Caribbean American civil society around things like the environment. Critical to the issue is the health of the Caribbean Sea. So we'd like to see that USAID going forward also ensures that Caribbean NGOs are part and parcel of the spend when money is being divested through these entities and these companies, and we are brought to the table and supported in growing our capacity as NGOs, as PPOs, quote unquote, to provide some of these services on the ground. And finally, I would say, I'm going to give it your turn, Terry.
Very
Sorry.
good, Terence. And
no, I think Dr. Nelson has really effectively articulated the case. I think the only thing I would add is that I would like to see real infrastructure that is independent of political parties, that exist as part of the basic governing machinery for all of the countries across the Caribbean, that integrates its diaspora, so that, you know, if the issue is promoting social cohesion in Guyana, that this is not a function of the particular political party that is a part of it, but that there's a mechanism for diaspora voices to be involved. If the issue is promoting entrepreneurship and investment, that there is a place that is independent of the particular politics of the moment where that can be engaged. If the issue is promoting efficiency and transparency of government, you know, facilitating e-government initiatives, you know, electoral reform, a professional civil service, that there is a mechanism that the Caribbean can take advantage of the expertise and the experiences of its American diaspora in particular, but more generally, its global diaspora. I think I'd like to see that emerge as part of just a normal
very
practice.
Good. Thank you there, Jason. I think we can confirm the recruitment of the Institute of Caribbean Studies and the Guyana Business Journal to our new collaboration between the Atlantic Council and the Caribbean Policy Consortium. And we certainly have material for work into the remainder of this year and 2023. Let me thank everybody for joining us today, the Atlantic Council for co-hosting and leading us here, Ambassador Marks, Das Feinstein, Melanie Chen, and everybody who's been with us electronically and virtually. Thank you very much. We still have one more day of Caribbean American Heritage Month, so please celebrate it well, and happy Independence Day to all of you in the United States. Thank you all.
Thank you.